Hello and welcome to the Karate Priest Podcast. I'm your host, Father Daniel Duplantis. I'm a martial artist, musician, airman, and a priest of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux. One of my other passions in life is teaching, especially teaching about the Catholic faith. Catholicism is a very deep faith. Jesus himself told Peter to put out into the deep for a catch. The most significant answers to life's most important questions often lie deep beneath the surface. Many people have questions about their faith. Through this podcast, my aim is to explore these questions and encounter incredible people along the way. Their stories show that God is constantly at work in our lives every single day, sometimes in the ordinary and sometimes in the extraordinary. Some of the topics treated in this podcast may be sensitive or controversial, but their discussion holds the key to truly living as God created us to live, which is to say that He created us to live in authentic freedom, loving Him above all else. Thank you for joining me on this journey of faith, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Karate Priest Podcast. Today we have a very special guest who is Amber Rose Schneider. Amber is very much responsible for helping me get into this whole podcasting business, and so it's a great pleasure to have her on the show today and to talk about her story, how she kind of grew up in the faith, how she kind of had a falling out, and how she came back to the faith. And with the work that she does now, she's going to tell us a little bit about herself and then tell us her story. So Amber, welcome to the Karate Priest.
Thank you so much, Father Dan. I'm happy to be here.
Great, very good. So I just kind of want you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about who you are, where you're from, what you're doing now, and then we'll go into your story from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Amber Rose. Obviously, I run the Religious Hippie, except for my podcast. My producer Todd runs that one, but that's the Catholic perspective with the Religious Hippie. You can basically follow me on any social media platform. I'm really into outdoorsy things. My favorite saint is St. Francis of Assisi. I'm currently studying graphic design at Liberty University online. I've done online school basically since 8th grade, so most of my life. So it's been fairly easy to get a hold of. But besides that, I love exercising. I love coffee. Some might say I'm a coffee addict. Don't listen to those people. I just love coffee. And besides that, I love the Latin Mass, and I am just all about spreading the love of God.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic. I myself am a coffeeholic. Every time I get a cup, I call it a transfusion.
I like that you're brave enough to say it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yep. Hi, my name's Father Dan, and I'm a coffeeholic. So quick question for you. What's your favorite kind of coffee?
My favorite kind of coffee would probably, okay, I don't know too many different types of coffee, but so far Colombian seems to be my favorite type of coffee. But I prefer any kind of Dunkin' blend except for their cold brew. I'm not the biggest fan of their cold brew.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, I typically drink Mystic Monk Royal Rum Pecan coffee. It's very, very good. And it's brewed by Carmelite monks, which is always awesome. Stuff made by monks and nuns are always some of the best stuff. So anyway, great. Thank you for your introduction. And so I'd like to know, you were brought up Catholic. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised, I was born in 1999, April 8th, 1999. And I was raised in a very Catholic household. We had pictures of Our Lady everywhere. Our room was decorated in Catholic decor. We constantly go to Mass every single Sunday, unless, of course, one of us was sick. We hardly ever got out of going to Mass, and we would always veil and wear dresses and stuff. My parents always made sure that we did all the traditions in the church. If there was a special feast day, we had specific books that my mom kept over from my dad's mom that would tell us, how to celebrate certain feast days. So like for St. John the Baptist, you would light a bonfire and then have like honey sticks and crickets or something. Oh, I don't know. I never did the cricket part, but we would have honey sticks and a bonfire, which dates back, way back to the early church. So we would do fun stuff like that during Christmas. We would have some Polish traditions that got passed down through generations that we would do as well. Overall, we were just like really into the faith. We were very catechized when we were younger. And by younger, I mean like under the age of 12. That's what I consider younger. And we were very well catechized. We went to, after church school. I mean, it's not really Sunday school. It was like a catechism class, but for little kids. And it wasn't like First Holy Communion class or anything. I'm not really sure. Do you know what that would be called, Father Dan?
We would just usually we call that CCD in our neck of the woods. Nowadays we call it youth formation,
Okay.
especially at the parish level. So it's that's been changed in the last couple of years what it's called, but yeah, there's a few names for it.
Okay, I love it. Yeah, and it was really funny because I was going through some old photos and stuff recently, and I came across a piece of paper that had basically a rating for me on it from when I was really small, and it basically told you like how I would behave in class and stuff. And they're like, she's really shy, but she's not afraid to make friends, and she contributes so much to this classroom. And I was just like, I feel like she's lying 50% of the time because that teacher, I would specifically hide underneath a specific chair in the classroom, and she always knew I was there, but she would always act surprised when I would jump out and surprise her. And so I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how much I actually contributed to that class, but thanks. And yeah, overall, we would always go out to eat after Sundays as a family. We would always have family brunch. We always observed, Easter and all the holidays. It was really wholesome. It was.
Awesome, yeah. So, and it was kind of around that time, I believe, that you started having a bit of a falling out from the faith. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened with that?
Yeah, so around 12, so after that stage of my life when we were pretty solid in our faith and everything like that, my family, specifically one of my family members, decided to get into sedevacantism. And because of that, we were pulled out of basically everything we knew. The foundations were cracked. Everything I knew suddenly became a lie because I didn't understand. I was only 12, 13 at the time. And so when you're that young and you're brought up on all of these very traditional foundations, and then somebody just takes a sledgehammer and knocks those down because of a website or something they came across, it can be very, very detrimental. And I thought to myself, if this is what Mass is like, because through sedevacantism, she found this one parish. Well, parish, it was in somebody's basement, so I don't really count it as a parish. And it did not feel right at all to me personally. I felt very I guess just under spiritual attack a lot from this specific I don't know, sedevacantism. And so because of that, I thought like if this is what Catholicism truly is and everything I was raised with was a lie, I don't even want to be Catholic anymore. And so I moved on from that, and eventually we stopped even going to that church because just things fell through. And I ended up just stopped going to church altogether. I stopped hanging out with my Catholic friends. Most of our Catholic friends actually were cut off from us. And we stopped just observing holy days of obligation. We stopped fasting on Fridays. We stopped having family meals together. We stopped praying together as a family. We stopped doing basically every single thing that made my childhood structured and had rules and all those things that kids need was basically taken out from underneath me. And so because of that, I had a lot of issues with God, thinking like, why would you allow this to happen? Because God does allow certain things, bad things to happen for our sanctification. But I also didn't, I had a very flawed theology. I thought that, I didn't understand free will completely, and that most of the bad things that happen are because of people's free will. They choose to do it, and God, out of his love and kindness and mercy, doesn't force his will upon us. We have to be able to accept that. And so through that, I didn't understand any of it. I didn't even know the catechism existed when I was that young. So I basically just fell away, started hanging out with some people that were very nice people, but they had a lot of issues. And I tried to be that person that fixed all of their issues because I had a hole in my own heart where even though I tried helping and doing nice things for people and all of this, that hole was still there. And I couldn't, no matter how much I tried helping other people and fixing, so to speak, other people, it just, it didn't work. And it just kind of I just kept digging a hole for myself, honestly.
Yeah. Wow. I kind of want to circle back around to something you mentioned in there. You mentioned the phrase sedevacantism. And so for our listeners, what that means, it's a Latin phrase, and it means vacant seat or empty seat, perhaps. And so can you tell us, Amber, a little bit about what that means? What is it referring to?
Yeah, I believe that just in general, what it means is that they believe the current pope that we have is not the pope I believe, right? In general,
Right.
they think he is the antichrist or something of that nature. I don't remember much, but I do know that they believe that the seat of Peter, the vicar of Christ, is empty, and that they don't believe the current pope we have, or a couple popes even before him,
Right. Yeah.
were even pope. And so they basically believe that the seat has been vacant for many years. And I'm not sure what they think's going to happen, like later, like if we're going to get another pope. Like I'm not sure their theology in that area. Um, but but I'm not exactly sure what their thinking's going to happen in the future when it comes to future popes and things like that. If we're ever going to have another one, I'm not sure what their ideology is, but that's basically what I believe they're coming from.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it's an interesting concept when you consider things like apostolic succession and the fact that, that the episcopacy, the office of the bishop, as well as, when you talk about the Pope as the Bishop of Rome is passed down by apostolic succession, it would sound like that succession would be lost at some point if it's going on for too long. And so it always reminds me of a phrase we hear in the gospel. We have this phrase, and this comes from St. John's Gospel, where Jesus just gives the bread of life discourse, and after that, many of the disciples leave, and he turns to the 12 and he says, "Will you also leave?" And then Peter says, he gives this profession. He says, "You have the words of everlasting life. To whom else shall we go?" And then in response to that, Jesus tells him, "Because of your faith, I say to you, you are Peter," which means rock. Petrus, it's where we get the word petroleum. It's oil that comes from rock. So he says, "You are the rock upon which I will build the church." And the next phrase is extremely important. "And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Uh, and so I think that's extremely important. That's why I kind of waited to save that passage until we get into the meat of this podcast episode. Was because that's kind of what I think of. If we reflect on that phrase, we could say that Jesus was either right, and the gates of hell will not prevail against the rock of the church and that seat, that which he gives Peter the keys of the kingdom, or Jesus is lying and he was wrong, which Jesus is God. And so I find that kind of hard to believe. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but yeah.
No, for sure. I do remember the main thing was through sedevacantism was that um, they believed Satan did prevail against the church and that he occupied the church. And I mean, God did tell us that there will be, wolves in sheep's clothing, and the church is not exempt from that. We will have some people, who are wolves in sheep's clothing, but we still need to stay close to Christ. We can't leave Christ because of a Judas or multiple Judases in general. And so with that, that's accurate.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. And you bring up a good point that that there's going to be problems, and when we look at the different parts of the church, we identify three, I guess you could say, dimensions of the church. We have the church triumphant in heaven. That's all the saints, all the souls who were here on earth that successfully ran the race, and now they share the victory, the triumph with the Lord. So we call them the church triumphant. The church suffering would be the church in purgatory, and awaiting the time where they can get to heaven. And then us here on earth as the church militant. And so that kind of language, saying that we're at war, that there's definitely going to be struggles, there's going to be problems that arise even within the church itself. And so we're not out of the battle by any stretch of the imagination as long as we are here on earth. But yeah, it's good to kind of bring up all those things. So with that, you kind of go into, I guess, this bit of a tailspin with your faith for a while, and you said it was 8 years, correct?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was about 8 years.
8 years. So how did you get out? What was the turning point? What changed for you at the end of that 8 year period to get you more or less in the direction where you are now?
I mean, I guess for the most part, I, gosh, I still was very attached to my roots. Because the roots, those were the happiest days of my life when we had that structure. When I was a kid, and everybody likes to look back to their childhood, most everybody, and be like, I had a good childhood. I was happy and I want to be a kid again when I didn't have piles and piles of homework and bills to pay. Um, but for me specifically, I was like, that was the time when I felt as though our family was a whole. And that was basically my foundation as a kid, was having a structured family. And so even though I was going throughout, my years in high school and everything like that, I constantly reflected back at my childhood, and I really missed it. I really missed those things we would do. Even though as a kid I would throw a complete fit during them. I didn't want to do them at all as a kid. But still, like looking back, like they offered all the things that I needed to be a well-rounded human, a structured in faith and family. And so when I started getting to the lowest point of my life where I would just let people walk all over me, I didn't care if people used me, for rides or whatever, because I would have to drive people everywhere and nobody would, give me gas money or anything. And I was just constantly basically being shoved under the bus. I was being bullied constantly. There was just really no end in sight. There was really no way out for me that I could have seen other than going back to my roots. And because I tried everything else at that point. I tried filling the hole in my heart with money, with people, with food, with I had an eating disorder for quite a while that went undiagnosed for a very long time until I finally decided to turn that around too, because I realized I'm like, this isn't going to help me anyways. Like I'm going to fix my relationship with food. And the thing is when I see I have a problem, I instantly want to fix it, and I go about the best way of being able to fix it. So I started basically being a therapist for myself. I don't know how to explain it, but that was basically all I had at the time as a teenager. As a teenager, you don't want to talk to your parents and be like, "Hey, I'm struggling with this stuff." I feel like a lot of the time they're embarrassed or scared, and I was one of them. And so I didn't want to say anything. And through all of it, again, the one thing that kept popping up was like, I miss having that family time, going to church, eating dinner together, observing days of obligation, and just, yeah, I guess the structure. And so one day I decided I was 18, and I had just finished hanging out with a bunch of friends. I was completely drained. I felt like even though I was there, I wasn't actually there, which I believe is a depression symptom. You basically feel empty within yourself, and you just you don't feel anything. You feel very numb. And I remember crying a lot, and basically I asked God, I'm like, hey, like I haven't prayed in over 8 years, but I need you to watch out for this one friend of mine. And I found it interesting looking back that I asked God to protect a friend and I didn't ask him for anything for my own. Because I feel like a lot of times people would be like, God, if you're there, like, grant me this, or if you're actually real, like, give me a sign. And I remember like talking to my friend after that whole group, and he was having a really difficult time with stuff, and he was a very abusive friend, but I still loved him dearly as a friend, brother. And I asked God, I'm like, just protect him, like I haven't prayed in 8 years, but just this one thing. And I instantly felt peace in that moment. And the next day was Sunday, and I got up and I felt good. And my friend texted me and he said he worked everything out, and I was like, oh, interesting. And I kind of thought about it for a second, and I was just like, well, obviously this wasn't my doing, because I didn't do anything to help him in this situation. This had to have been God. And that was still at one of my lowest points where I was really struggling with social anxiety, depression, just a bunch of other stuff. And I decided to go to church, mainly to thank God, but also to just like be like, hey, maybe there's something more, you know? And I used to go to church on Sundays with my family, so no harm can come of it. I had a major conversion in front of the Eucharist. I sat in the back, and ever since then, I kind of been on this journey of coming back to the faith. And I feel as though I came officially back into the faith when I was 19, when I did my confession, because that's when you truly come back into the faith, when you go to confession and you confess all those years of sin, and you really come back to Christ through mercy and forgiveness.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a couple of things that really stick out to me there. You say the first time you went back to mass was really out of the sense of Thanksgiving. What's really funny about that is that the word Eucharist, and you say you had this kind of conversion experience in the presence of the Eucharist. The word Eucharist is Greek for Thanksgiving. And so it's amazing that like that was kind of like your motivation for going back. And it's we always talk about, we call this exitus reditus mentality with God, that God always kind of like initiates and sends down. There's even like when you look at the incarnation, that God comes down, God always initiates, God always gives first, and then we always take what he receives and then we give it back. So like we call it the exit and the return. And the same thing here, and even just like, as he comes down, he exits heaven, becomes man, in a sense, in the person of the Son. The Son then returns to heaven, and then, with our salvation in hand, in a way. And so you're kind of doing that as he initiates the sacrament. He always initiates that relationship with you of Thanksgiving. You then take that Thanksgiving and then return it back to him. I think that's just so beautiful to see that. So yeah, beautiful story. So where did that take you from there? What happened afterwards? How did you get from this turning point in your life to what you're doing now? What happened?
Yeah, I honestly was not prepared for it. It was almost like an overnight kind of thing, which some conversions can take over 30 years. Mine kind of just happened in 5 hours. Well, I think it was in the works. I really, really do think it was in the works over the course of those 8 years. I had to go through and experience certain things and really, I guess, get to my lowest point in order to, because when you get to your lowest point, you can no longer look down. You suddenly have to look up. And who's up there? God. God is up there. So I guess technically for me, after I hit my lowest point, I looked up, you know. And the thing though is that after that, I kind of just had a whole switch. It was just a switch turned. And I instantly wanted to have Catholic decor in my room everywhere. I found a rosary that I hadn't prayed in probably about 10 years. Um, that was given to me by my mom as a gift as a baby. And I still have it too. It's hanging up on my rosary holder. And I started just really getting into it. And I started going to daily mass, or nightly mass at the time. And I started going to adoration. And I couldn't get enough. I could not get enough of it. I started buying more books than I could probably read about Catholicism. And I stayed up till 3 a.m. researching and reading the old church father documents and the Vatican documents, and just anything I could get my hands on. Like Catholic Answers was a huge help for me. I needed to know. I needed to know everything. Unfortunately, that actually led to burnout.
Yeah.
I kind of went a little bit too hard too soon. So I kind of slowed down a little bit. I started focusing on community, and I went to NCYC, which is National Catholic Youth Conference.
Yes, I've been several times. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
great retreat. Yeah, great
It's
conference.
amazing. I absolutely loved it. It really set me on fire to see so many like-minded individual Catholics, but also the speakers. The speakers are truly what inspired me. I went with a group from a church, and I didn't make friends on the trip. I'm not really that big of like, I don't know. I'm not very good at making friends. um, but I just really felt connected to the people who were speaking and their stories. And that's what inspired me a lot. And then one day, my TikTok was literally just all fun and game stuff. There was literally nothing nothing on my TikTok that was actually Catholic or even just in general Christian like. And I posted one video, and it was basically me going to church and just showing around one of my old parishes, and it blew up overnight. I basically gained 5,000 followers in a day.
Whew, wow.
Yeah. And it shocked me. I was so confused. I was like, what? It didn't make sense to me because I was just like, this, who follows, how, like, what 5,000 people follows a Catholic, which such a mediocre video? Like, I had no other videos besides that one. Like, it didn't make any sense to me. So I was just like, well, I guess this must be another sign from God. Like, I mean, in a sense, you got to pray about it. You can't be too certain. But I was like, it doesn't make sense literally any other way. Like, I have no other Catholic videos. I don't like it just didn't make sense. And so I was like, well, maybe this is a path I should pursue is, online stuff. And eventually, um, 5,000 turned into 10,000, and 10,000 turned into 15,000, and 15,000 turned into 50,000. And now we're at 99,000 followers on TikTok. Um, and so when I was doing that, I realized like people really liked my videos. They really liked what I was saying about the Catholic Church, and they really wanted me to go more in depth. But at that time, TikTok was not advanced enough. You could only put a 60-second video up, and you would probably have to put up another like 4 or 5 parts to that video if you actually wanted to get your entire story across. And now I have the 3-minute video option because I don't know how it works. But they wanted me to start a YouTube channel, and I was just like, oh, all right. I mean, I have some experience in YouTube. When I was younger, I would do dumb videos, just editing them. And so I started a YouTube channel, and that took off really, really well. We're at like 7,000 now, 6,000, 7,000 now.
Wow.
Subscribers on YouTube. Yeah. And it's crazy to me because if God has a plan for you, if he has a plan for you, and if you are pursuing that plan, he will open the doors for you. It doesn't matter how crazy it might seem. It doesn't matter how how much people push back on you, because I had a lot of people push back on me because I had no Catholic friends at that point. They were all either Protestant or just non-religious in general. And they, he will open those doors for you. And if the door is closed and there's no other doors, he will open a window. Like, he finds a way to get you where you are supposed to be if you submit yourself to his will. And all these opportunities just kept falling into my lap, and I would pray about it. And once I would pray about it, I wouldn't get like any weird feelings. I felt like this is something that's good, and it doesn't go against, God or the church. I feel like it's beneficial. I'm evangelizing, but just in a different way. And sure enough, more opportunities just kept coming. And some I did have to turn down just due to the fact that when I prayed about it, it did not feel right. And I just, some things were more sketchy. And then Todd came in and was just like, hey, do you want to start a podcast? And it actually took me a few months at first because I was like, sketchy person texting me. But I'm sorry, Todd.
Oh goodness.
But that's my mindset at the time because I was very naive and young, and I didn't trust many people, especially when they gave me unreal offers like that, where they're like, I will produce this podcast for you. And it was one of those things where I was a little sketched out because I'm like, are people this nice? Like, is this how the world is? Like, I wasn't used to it. And so a few months later, he texts me back and he's just like, hey, so you rejected me the first time, but do you want to do it again? And I was like, okay, all right. So this time I did do it. Because I was like, it's an amazing opportunity, and Todd's a great guy. And I was completely wrong, but at the same time, you can't be too careful out there,
Yeah.
But no, and honestly, the main thing is that God led me to the point where I am today. Like, it was none of my own doing. Yeah, sure, I walked. Yeah, sure, I drove to the church. Yeah, but God's the one that softened my heart, and He's still working on it. There's some areas I still struggle with. And so, but honestly, like, He opened all the doors, and I wouldn't be doing any of this if it was not, for Him or for His benefit or my benefit, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think what you do is extremely important because when we think of, a phrase that we hear oftentimes now, the new evangelization, I think in many ways it takes the form of a lot of what you're doing. And I think it was Archbishop Chaput put out a book a few years ago about like living in what we call a post-Christian society. And that kind of meaning that like it seems in a way like the world, even the West, where Christianity really kind of took a hold, um, is like places that were Christian strongholds are becoming less and less Christian in the idea, kind of like the world moving on from Christianity. And so we have this phrase called the new evangelization, which, at least to my understanding, is being able to take the same gospel, to take the same good news, but to, in essence, to carry it and to translate it in a different way, in new ways, I guess we could say, taking the same old message, but making it, in a sense, new, renewing it new ways. And so, like the things that you're doing with your social media, and in my experience, I find that most people who end up going viral for things weren't looking to go viral in the first place. It's like you say, these things kind of fall into their laps, and just like you say, the Lord opens the doors, especially for something like this. So you have an incredible presence on social media. As you said, it just continue to grow, where there's good fruit, you see that good fruit and it continues to spread. What I want to kind of do is, I know I already asked you about like your favorite coffee. I kind of want to do a few more like rapid fire type questions with you, just to, kind of get a sense more of like your personal preferences, things that you like, things like that. So first question, who's your favorite saint and why?
My favorite saint is Saint Francis of Assisi because he was really into animals and he walked around barefoot and he yeeted himself into a rose bush. My mom would kill me if I ever did that. But because her roses are very special to her. But but I love being barefoot and I have more animals than I probably need. So
Awesome. That's a good choice. Francis of Assisi is fantastic. Next question. What is your favorite part about going to mass?
definitely just the connection with the priest and just everything going on. I'd love to sit up front and just stare at the priest. I want to get in every detail, every little bit.
Stalker.
Literally, literally though. And I'm pretty sure the priest has turned around and made eye contact with me. And I'm literally just like bug-eyed and I'm just like, what are you doing now? Like, why is your hand positioned like that? What does this mean? What are you doing here? It's like, I know in a sense, like math is
Yeah.
technically supposed to be a time of analyzation and meditation and connecting, but I'm just all about like, what does that mean? What is this significance of? Where's like, I am just so engulfed in all of the richness of the mass itself that I like to sit up front and just stare at the priest and his vestments. I love to know the meaning behind his vestments and
Yeah.
everything and stuff too. And so I literally cannot get enough. Something's new every single time I go.
That's awesome. And then one more kind of question. Confession was a huge part of your conversion story too. What would you say to somebody who maybe hasn't been to confession in a while, or maybe kind of wants to go to confession, but they're unsure? What would you say to somebody who maybe wants to take that next step in going to confession?
Yeah, I would definitely suggest, if you've been away from the faith for a long time, to do a general confession. This is a confession where the priest will be able to ask you questions and be more thorough over the last, I believe it's like what, 20 years, 15 years of your life? Um, it,
Something like that.
Something like that. Basically, you list out all the sins from those years, and the priest will be able to go through and ask you specific questions, just help you through that so that they really get into all the nooks and crannies. Um, I personally didn't know that existed. So when I came back into my faith, my list was like super long, and this poor priest had to sit there through all of it in a normal confession setting. um, but that was the first thing I would suggest. I would also suggest doing the examination of conscience from Bulldog Catholic. It's a PDF file online. They have a really great in-depth examine, and it also walks you through confession, what you're supposed to say, why we have confession, etc. So I highly suggest you download that PDF and then you print it off. And just go through that the night before. Obviously, ask the Holy Spirit to come into your heart and your mind and your eyes and just reveal to you any sins that might be hidden that you need to come to terms with. And besides that, the last thing I would say is to get a confessor. I know I suggest this usually for scrupulosity, people who struggle with scrupulous, but I think it's just good in general to have a confessor because it's a priest who you only confess to. So you only go to them during confession, and you only and they're able to get it, have a friendship with you, and they get to know you better. And through that, you gain a friend, but not just that, somebody who can actually be a guide to you spiritually as well.
Awesome. Good stuff. Amber, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. And again, Amber has a huge social media presence. You can find her on just about any platform on social media under the name Religious Hippie, or is it The Religious Hippie?
The Religious Hippie.
Religious Hippie.
The hippie is IE, just for those.
And hippie with an IE. And can you tell us again the name of your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Catholic's Perspective with the Religious Hippie.
Excellent. Sounds good. Amber, thank you so much for being here today. Again, this is Amber Rose Schneider as our guest on The Karate Priest. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Karate Priest. If you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and like The Karate Priest on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're ever in South Louisiana, come visit me at the Cathedral of St. Francis de Sales in Houma. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can also email me at thekaratepriest@gmail.com. Your questions are welcomed and may be used in future episodes. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down on you and remain with you forever. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metatomics at metatomics.org or find us on social media for other unique content.